just give a little shout out so that people who may want to connect with you during the meeting, they can sort of say, oh, that's what they actually look like in person. I only recognize their voice if I'm standing next to them. So we're going to do that. My name is Victoria Wegener. I work as a consultant with the MacArthur Foundation, with the Mott Foundation, with the Noyce Foundation, but I've been very privileged to work with the MacArthur Foundation around the Digital Media and Learning Initiative. So this is seeing you badge people. You know, you're sort of the mysterious badge people out there in the MacArthur Initiative. This is very exciting for me. On a sort of initiative level to sort of see the people who are actually doing the work behind the badges. And I can't tell you, we have these big conversations at the DML meetings, and we're just, the badges is sort of some of the most innovative and interesting stuff, and it just is blowing people away. And I can't tell you how happy I am when the badge team at HASTAC said, Victoria, would you like to come to the meeting and help facilitate with us? I was like, yeah, are you kidding? It's like playing with the cool kids. So I'm very excited to be here. And I'm going to be helping to facilitate during the day and help you. Really, my job as a facilitator is to capture all the knowledge, ideas, information in the room and sort of feed it back to you, right? And so my job is to help you have better, more interesting, more productive conversations. I'm not here as a content. I don't bring content to this conversation. What I'm helping is to connect the content to the ideas to the action. So that's my job as a facilitator here. So everybody ready for a little roll call? All right, so we're going to do this very quickly. 4-H USDA robotics. Are you in the house? Nice. Yay. Very good. American graduate. Where are you? Very good. Yes. Yay. Very nice. Badges work for vets. Where are you in the house? Nice. There you are, gentlemen. Buzz math. Buzz. Yes. Stand up. Come on, people. Computer science student network. Badge system. There you go. If you're behind a pillar, get out. It's like coming out of the closet. You got to get out. Okay. Design exchange, where are you in the house? Nice, very good. Design for America, where are you? Very nice. Lone Wolf, nice, okay. Disney Pixar Wilderness, Explorer, where are you? Very good, in the back of the house. Earthworks, where's Earthworks?
Here we are.
Very nice, there's their real life self. Intel and Society for Science and the public badges, very good. All right, leverage for digital on-ramps. Where are you? Very nice, gentlemen. Hello, live in person. Mouse wins! My Girl Scout, this is my favorite game. My Girl Scout sash is an app, people. There you go. Very good. The National Manufacturing Badge System. Very good. Computer in hand. Excellent. Nature badges. Nature badges. You gotta stand. People gotta see it. Nature badges. Very good. Partners in Learning Network. Where are you? There you go. Right there. Pathways for Lifelong Learning. Very good. Hello in the house. Planet Stewards. Where are you? Very good. Planet Stewards. Preparing librarians to meet the needs of the 21st century youth. There you go. Very nice. Robotics and STEM badges using NASA content. Very good. The NASA geeks. Good. Welcome. S2R. There you go. This is one of the hardest ones to say. SANFS, learner-driven badges.
Stop.
Stop. Good, thank you. Now I'm going to be able to say that. Sweetwater occupies. Sweet, nice. There you go. Let's see. Badge stack. Where's badge stack? Badge stack in the house. Excellent. Welcome. Moodle as user. Mahara as displayer. Excellent. Very good. One lone wolf. Peer-to-peer university. Peer-to-peer, 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 calling peer-to-peer. Not in the house yet, okay. Level up, level up, level up. Excellent, very nice. Pathways to global competence. Pathways, Asia. There you go, back in the back. Let's see, digital youth filmmaker badge system. Digital, there you go, very nice. Who Built America badges. Okay, did I miss anyone? Is everyone here? Is everyone ready to rock and roll this meeting? I'm excited. I'm going to turn it over to Cathy. We're going to have a great meeting, and welcome everybody. Welcome.
everyone, and welcome to Duke University. Welcome to the John Franklin Humanities Institute, and welcome to HASTAC, which is a distributed organization, part of which has its administrative headquarters here. And welcome, most of all, to the Badges for Lifelong Learning. I guess it's our first real meetup and matchup. We've really struggled about whether we call this a workshop or conference, what it is. What it really is what you've all been doing for the last months in the webinars and the conference calls and the emails and on the listserv, on the wikis, coming together face to face. It's so great to see you, not just in thumbnails and on webinars, but to actually see you face to face and having something pretty amazing happen in the next 2 days. The program is a program you've developed that we've worked with you to develop. I'll be doing formal introductions later. Theo Goldberg and I will be doing formal introductions later and talking a little bit more about what's going to unfold. But right now I'd like to introduce you to Duke University's Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Keith Whitfield. Professor Whitfield's field is health disparities, worldwide health disparities. He's also in charge of our accreditation system and one of our leaders here, but also nationally, in really rethinking what you all know, which is unless what we value is somehow counted, what we value is going to be discounted. I can't say enough about how much, for me, the tragedy of the 21st century is we're a quantitative time that is operationalizing 19th century values. Standard deviation, deviation from a norm are all values that were developed. Actually, the whole method of statistics were developed in the 19th centuries by eugenicists, by Galton, who was looking for a way to mathematically and scientifically justify his idea that the British aristocracy should be paid to reproduce and poor people should be forcibly sterilized. And this is the method that's been instantiated as our ways of counting for 120 years. To my mind, you are the people that are coming up with workable alternatives to a very archaic system. And I'm so excited about what you're doing, and I'm so excited that Vice Provost Whitfield is here to welcome you today from our own real location, which is Duke University. Thank
you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I was going to say, if you're not from here in the South, usually we start many religious services, and this is probably going to be a religious experience. And we start religious services, and the first thing you got to do is tell the minister, good morning with hearty good morning. He starts keeping an eye on you. So good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. Boy. Doesn't take a lot to get this group going, which is fantastic. 8 o'clock in the morning. Hello and welcome. Let me extend a warm welcome to all the participants to the beautiful Duke University campus. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the MacArthur Foundation, to HASTAC, to Mozilla, the Bill Gates Foundation for their generous support of this competition. And let me say to you, welcome home. Home is a place you feel comfortable, a place where your family lives, a place where with each day you share experiences with others that bond you. Families are not constrained by geography, and they're not strained by genetics. If you're here long enough on the campus, you'll get a sense of the Duke University family that exists. Actually, if you didn't notice, Cathy and I are twin brother and sister. Opposite sex, but one of our president's priorities is to build out new models of problem-based, cross-disciplinary teaching and research. Sound like some of the things that you guys get excited about? Yeah. He's a very smart guy. And I have to say that, but I would say that anyway. So you can see why this is the perfect place for you to think about connections with family. Family maybe that you've only known over the internet, but family nonetheless, and family that's going to grow through the experience that you have here. The things you do and share with the other scholars here today make you part of a growing family that's pushing the boundaries of traditional science and pedagogy. I hope you have an exciting and rewarding time and find valuable the ideas and approaches that you'll get a chance to share with your other family members. With that, have a great time and good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate. Before we get started, I just want to thank a number of people who made today possible. First of all, you all have dealt a lot with Sunny Lee. Sunny, I'm not seeing you. Where? Sunny, your stand. And Cheryl Grant. Cheryl, where is Cheryl here?
She's working.
Cheryl is running around. What else is there, right? Cheryl and Sunny, as you know, have been in constant communication with you. MacArthur and Gates Foundation are this competition is quite unusual in that you don't just get a pile of money, which is always nice, but you actually get a community and peers and support and assistance in making what you're doing work and making it as valuable and important as possible. And Sunny and Cheryl have been, have been working. I never thought of that. Have been working very hard. That dates me, boy. Have been working very hard to make sure that your ideas are as represented in the next couple of days as possible, so that you all have a chance to develop those. David, I think we're supposed to be doing this one together. So, David Theo Goldberg is the other David and I are the co-directors of the Digital Media and Learning Competition, and David is also the director of the Digital Media and Learning Hub, which kind of is the Uber everything for the Digital Media and Learning Initiative and Competition. Let's see, what else? Badge Gallery. I hope you all have had a chance and will have a chance to look around and look at the badge galleries. Most of these are prototypes. Just ideas that we hope will be further fleshed along by the end of this event. Trying to get Jen Humke's here from MacArthur. I don't think An Mei is here yet, is that right?
She's on her way.
An Mei Chung is on her way. Connie Yao will be joining us later from the MacArthur Foundation. Robert Torres is here from the Gates Foundation. We'll be introducing him as well later on. Mandy, did you want to talk about some logistical things?
Yeah. Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Mandy Daly. I think you've probably all heard from me at some point. I'm the Director of Administration for HASTAC and the Digital Media and Learning Competition.
Just a mic, please.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm not correcting myself, but Mandy Daly, Director of Administration for the HASTAC and MacArthur Foundation Digital Media and Learning Competition. I just want to draw your attention. You have a FAQ sheet in your packet that has the instructions for connecting to the Wi-Fi. If you have any problems with the Wi-Fi connection the first time, you might shut your browser, reopen it, make sure you're on the right visitor Duke network, and let us know if you have any problems. If you have any problems, just find one of us in the hallway. Once you are on the Wi-Fi throughout the day, if you have any problems, we put in place a ticketing system. This is similar to what we did at the California Academy of Sciences for those of you that were at that event. Just submit a ticketing system. We'll be watching all day, so if you have a problem with any technology, need help in a room, general question, we'll dispatch someone to you. I just wanted to, I think Cathy might have, but for those of you, actually, do I have my team here in this room? I'm not sure, they're all running around taking care of things, but we've got several HASTAC staff members and Mozilla folks here. If you need anything, feel free to stop one of us in the hallway. You guys, are you here? Ruby, can you stand up? Ruby's our tech person. Fiona in the back of the room. Anna Rose Beck is here, as well as Cheryl Grant. Over here on the side, Mary Tess, Stefan, and Sheila Earl. So I think that is it. Let me make sure. And Carla Casilli and Sunny Lee. And last of all, we do have a Chatsy chat room in place if you guys want to use that to talk amongst yourselves through the event. A word of caution, staff and team members will be jumping in and out of that, but we won't be monitoring it closely for specific questions. So if you do have a question, use the ticketing system. And really, welcome and enjoy the workshop. We're thrilled to have you here.
Good morning, everybody. Just a couple of quick words. First of thanks to Duke University for hosting us, to HASTAC Duke and Cathy's team here, the folks who've just been introduced. I won't go through their names again, for making this happen. It's taken a lot of hard on the ground work, so their hosting us is really a pleasure and a privilege. To my own staff from the University of California who've come along, Marites and Sheila, and we're here in order to facilitate the extension of your work that no doubt is well underway. This is about extending your work around badging and its deployment. So we hope that this is a really productive couple of days, and you'll leave from here energized to, if not complete the work by the next time we meet, certainly develop it considerably so that when we do meet again, there'll be considerable progress on the way in which your badge projects and systems are developing. So welcome to you all. Thanks for taking the time out of what I know are busy schedules for everybody. A word of thanks to those who have made this possible: the MacArthur Foundation, Connie and Anne May, the Gates Foundation, Robert Torres, from whom you'll hear in just a few minutes. All of this, of course, would not be possible without them, so I think we owe them our heartfelt sense of gratitude. So please join me.
Now I'm going to introduce Chung, who is the Associate Director of Education at the MacArthur Foundation. In your package, you'll find a whole biography of Anmei, and I just want to say very warmly and happily how fantastic it has been to work with you, Anmei, on the Connected Learning Initiative, on the Digital Media Learning Competition. When we first were presented with the idea of badges, I mean, there wasn't even very much out there in the world about what badging was. And the inspiration was to try to not only find those leaders in the field who were talking about new forms of assessment and really developing badges, but to create a field. And I think Anmei and Connie and Robert at Gates and the MacArthur Foundation have really been inspiring and making all of us think about what we can do with this new system. Not just how to take an old system and give it some shiny badges, but how to really make this a new way of counting what connected learning is and what new forms of peer contribution and peer learning are. And Anmei, I especially want to thank you for all your contribution, and I'm really looking forward to your remarks. And again, in your programs you'll find the specifics about Anmei's biography, but I'm now going to turn it over to you and hear your words. Thank you.
So, let me get yourself here. Oh, really? Yeah. I didn't test it though.
We'll test it with
So right now, you want the video first? Yeah, no problem. So happy.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
morning.
It's great to see familiar faces, actually. And it's actually great to see all the winners in a room as opposed to, I think we were at the DML conference, there were about 2,000 people. So first of all, I want to thank David and Cathy and HASTAC, as well as Mozilla, for the great work they've been doing thus far on the badges. I mean, we as funders, we essentially give the money and you all do all the work. So it's a great position for us to be in. But I also want to let you know just how incredibly excited we are about the work that you all are doing, and how incredibly excited the world is about what you're doing. So I would say that every time we bring up badges in whatever venue that I happen to be at, people, you know, whether they're from industry or from universities or from other places, are like, oh, what's happening with the badges, etc. So not to put any pressure on you all, but we're looking forward to what emerges from this shortly. So what today I'm going to do is, and we're actually, we're ahead of schedule, David. Is that possible for us? So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time sort of talking about what we're doing, but I want to set the context for where badges fit into the grant making and our grant making as it continues to evolve, to give you a sense of you know, where the work that you're doing fits into our greater landscape as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about connected learning. And connected learning is the framework that we're using for our grant making that's embedded in research. And as many of you know, MacArthur is steeped in the research for the work that we're doing. So at its very simplest, let's see, and this is moving quickly. What is connected learning? Connected learning, at its very simplest, is really about how young people are experiencing the three spheres that they come in contact with. It's what matters the most to them in terms of their interests, their peer culture, the things they want to get good at, and the academic piece of it as well. And in doing so, we truly believe, and we think that the research will bear out, as well as the practices, is that there will be multiple entryways that are created to learning. Because right now through schools, there's essentially one entryway to capture the learnings, and that this will lead to actually greater pathways to career, civic, and academic success. And that is our ultimate goal. So what I'm going to describe to you today is what these learning experiences look like for young people when these connections are made across these three different spheres. And some of you have seen this already, I think. There are three spheres of the interest, academic, and pathway. And what the difference here is that I think these are things that may not be unfamiliar to you all in terms of what they stand for individually, but it's what the connections are and what the role of digital media is in this. And at the end of the day, what we're really trying to achieve is that this is an approach that leads both kids to learning the traditional skills, but also the 21st century skills in terms of the new skills that are being learned through digital media and learning. And a lot of what we've been working on and talking about is different than I think what you're traditionally hearing through the media around educational technology. And you'll see how our grant making has actually continued to evolve. So, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about our background and how we actually got here. So, in 2004, the grant making at MacArthur worked into this notion of thinking about digital media. They had spent years and years in traditional school reform, and I think as if Connie were here, she would say it was essentially not a great investment of our dollars, and I would say maybe even a disaster too as well. So they really started thinking, what could we do? What could we do to invest our limited dollars to really make a difference for more kids? So phase one of our grant making was essentially from 2004 to 2009, thereabouts, and it was exploratory. It was an opportunity to really think through the kinds of things that we as MacArthur could do in particularly the out-of-school space, because that seemed to be the place where you could do the greatest innovations. And one of the ways that we focused was trying to understand how young people participated in digital media. And for some of you who have read Henry Jenkins' work, the participatory culture aspect of what he talks about was a really big part of the beginning research that helped inform and shape the digital media portfolio. And it's one that he submits that it's about, how we focus on literacy and how it becomes an individual form of expression to a community form of expression. So we really began our work in DML asking one very simple question. And that was, what exactly are young people doing and all that time they're spending online and digital media? That was the question. And so out of that evolved, I think, two simple answers in many ways, none of which will surprise you. And it came out of the study by Mimi Ito. Many of you have heard her speak, but it's also it's called the Digital Youth Study, where she did a meta-analysis of a number of studies. And the two big answers were, one, they're spending time with friends, not surprising. This is the hanging out peer culture piece. And they're doing exactly what they do offline. I'm sure all of you hang out at the malls at some point in your lives, and that was your form of hanging out. I did, although I wasn't allowed to. And what are they doing? They're gossiping, they're socializing, they're even participating in data and dating rituals online as well. And again, there's nothing magical about what they do. But what is different about it is that they're also learning technology skills at the same time. So there's some skill building involved as well as the ability to socialize and do this. The second thing that they're learning, that the researchers learn, is that, again, no surprise, they're participating in things that they're interested in. Nothing new there, right? But they're also getting good at what they're doing in this space. And they're in what our researchers call interest-driven communities as well. So they are showing up at game sites, they're showing up in fan fiction sites, chess or science, knitting, pottery, crafts, where they are not only consuming information, which I think they're often mistakenly, people think they're just consuming, but they're making and doing and creating, and they're participating in some form. And they're sharing this information with each other in a way that they haven't been able to do. They're commenting, they're giving each other critical feedback to help them get better at what they are interested in doing. So a lot of you have heard about the Harry Potter fan website. This is one example of what a fan fiction where there are hundreds and thousands of people who are interested and have the same interest. But here they're writing and sharing and critiquing and reviewing. And I think one of the really interesting things about this site, if you haven't seen this, is what the creators of this site have been able to do is they've thought about this in terms of how do you galvanize all these young people who are interested in Harry Potter to moving towards to some sort of civic engagement. And how do you create this civic engagement so there's long-lasting change? So there's a really intentional effort by galvanizing the folks who participate on the site. And some of the examples, some of the things that they've done in this last year is that they raised over $125,000 in just 2 weeks for Partners in Health in Haiti, and they were able to send 5 cargoes of life-saving supplies to Haiti. Another thing that they did in terms of galvanizing the folks on the site were that they were able to donate 87,000 books across the world, and 20,000 of them in the Mississippi River Delta area. So those are the kinds of things that that are happening on these different sites. So some of the other things that researchers found as they were continuing this exploration phase was that, that in this online movement, the interest-driven communities are often places where kids are just hanging out with each other or with their siblings, and they're seeing what their friends are doing. And so they're finding the opportunity to just sort of lurk and get a sense of what's going on, and then they have the opportunity to mess around or tinker, to be able to see whether it's something that they might want to do further or to explore a little bit. And then, depending on their interest, they start to jump in and they geek out and they start becoming competent at these various skills. And so hence the book, Hanging Out, Messing Around, and Geeking Out, that Mimi's research is based on. And really sort of, I think, the underpinnings for a lot of the work that we are doing now. So what did MacArthur do with this initial research? What MacArthur did with this thinking, okay, so we know this, and we know how kids are becoming interested in how they're using the online work. What do we do to build on this and figure out how to build the institutions that connect the learning and the peer culture so that kids have the opportunity to continue learning in a positive way. So they approached the Chicago Public Library in Chicago and asked them whether they would be willing to partner. And in this space called U Media, and U Media is actually a name that the kids came up with in terms of describing the teen space at Harold Washington Library in Chicago. It's a 5,000 square foot teen space. It's dedicated to the teens. It is incredibly noisy. For those of you who visited, if you walk in and you're expecting to have quiet time, it's not going to happen in that space, right? But it's noisy. The youth are engaged. It's full of amazing toys that people can check out, just like they do. Check out most of the library cards. There's both digital and analog materials there. And I think the secret ingredients in this space are the mentors and the librarians. It's without a doubt one of the reasons why this space is successful. And the reason why is the mentors actively facilitate and they engage kids in the hanging out, messing around, and geeking out, and they really are able to facilitate those opportunities so that it helps students really think about how the things that they're learning will morph into helping them with their academic, civic engagement, and potential workforce development. So examples of some of the things that they do are literacy law, and they come together once a week and they are writing their own work, they're performing it, they're displaying it for themselves, and they're also creating music or other documentaries, so it's an incredibly vibrant space. So I want to show you this video, and I'm hoping it works here, that I think captures what this space means for kids. And this is a piece of work that one of the participants wrote about his experience, so it's poetry in a sense. Oops. Right, here we go.
I've never been inside a library more times than I can count. One time, Torres was many times when this place became a second home, the second home was in the front. This became my home.
So I think this beautifully captures the experience. That wasn't actually the point of his writing this piece. It was part of the work that he was doing in terms of literacy law, and we just thought, what an amazing, I couldn't say it better than this person did. So I wanted to share that with you. So where UMedia has taken us is that it has really sparked a lot of interest in folks in terms of if they can do it at CPL, we can do it in libraries across the country and museums too as well. So we partnered with the Institute of Museum Library Services to fund up to 30 learning labs. We're calling them learning labs for a particular reason. Across the country to spread the media ideas and principles. And the reason why we're calling them learning labs is it's not about replicating what you see at UMedia, but it's actually replicating a set of principles that are coming out of the UMedia work that will allow for greater innovation. So our hope is that these learning labs become other innovative sites that other people can learn from, because as you all know, it's all about remixing. We use that term here a lot, and I think that's one of the goals of UMedia. So let me just highlight a few of the principles that came out of this UMedia work that's important for connected learning in terms of connecting peers and interests. One is shared purpose. So you have to have peers who are in the site who have a sense of shared purpose and interests. Valuing the communication among the peers is absolutely critical. And that the mentors do a tremendous job of making sure that that free-flowing communication occurs and is well received. And the other big piece of it is the ability to share the expertise of the peers with each other. So it's got to be visible, and they have to have the opportunity to intentionally share it. So there's a lot of performance and feedback. So what you heard was a performance here, but UMedia, as you saw too as well, is this wide open space. So that there's an opportunity for youth who are just hanging out to be social, to also see what other kids are doing, both formally and informally. Everything in the space is available, and there are opportunities for collaboration. It's easy to walk by a group of kids and join, and the mentors do an incredible job of making sure that they connect kids with these various opportunities. Tinkering, lurking, is a huge part of what happens in this space. For me, I don't know whether for you, unless you're incredibly gifted, my interests have to be nurtured and have to be developed. I don't know what it is, I don't know until someone introduces it to me. And then it's an opportunity for me to learn something new. And mentors, tremendous role that they play. They play this huge role, as I've said, in terms of helping youth identify particular interests and helping them transition through various places. And they really help kids figure out how to develop these competencies. So I think what you see here is that all this is actually possible without media. I think one of the things that we did was we actually ran focus groups about a year and a half ago, and we showed various pieces from new media. And the thing that people saw that made it possible for them to do in their communities, and we did this focus group all over the country with different groups of people, is that they saw this. They didn't see the technology or digital piece. They saw that kids were having the opportunity to socialize, hang out, and learn different things and interact with adults. And that's what they saw, and that's what they thought made it possible, even if they were adults who were wary of technology. So this is a thing that you'll hear from us regularly, that in part it's not about the digital media, it's about the nature of learning, and that is the goal of connected learning. But that each of these aspects of the learning that we're talking about are hugely benefited by digital media. So this is the out-of-school time space that we've been working with, but just as important is us trying to understand the connection between peer culture interests and the cultivation of these interests among youth in terms of making connections to the academic piece. Schools are a really important way for reaching out to kids that may not come to the library or museum, for example. It's still, I think, a vehicle for trying to reach the most amount of kids. It may not be the easiest way to get to them, but it is still the way that exists. So really thinking about how do you get the kind of connected learning activities that a lot of middle class kids are getting, but there are a tremendous number of kids, as you all know, who aren't able to access those opportunities. So a partnership began with the Institute of Play in New York City. It's a Quest to Learn school in New York City, which I'm sure many of you have heard. Quest to Learn it's in its third year. Cathy and her team, of which Robert was at the beginning, he can probably share his experiences with you, were very instrumental in getting Quest to Learn off the ground in New York City. And now, this year we have Quest in Chicago too as well. In New York, it's a public school. In Chicago, it's a charter school. And when Quest was created, there were 4 design principles that they started with and continue to follow as they developed the schools. One was what Cathy Salen calls creating a need to know. And the need to know is ensuring that kids have the information that they need to know, the interest part, by organizing activities around complex problems. It offers space for possibility for learners to tinker, explore, hypothesize, and test assumptions. So it's that learning by doing that I think many of us are learned best with. It offers opportunities for authority and expertise to be shared among not just the learners, but among the teachers as well. So it's that peer-to-peer opportunity, and it's classroom as an opportunity for social space too. And it's about supporting multiple and overlapping pathways towards mastery. So those were the principles that they started with. So in terms of, I think, describing Quest to those who have not been there, who are still very interested in figuring out, what are the, how is this different from schools? Are they still, the question I think that's always asked is, but are they reading, learning, writing, and math and all those basic things? And the answer is yes, and they're doing it better. They're having fun at it, and it's also not just these core competencies, but also learning the 21st century skills that are involved. And they are not just learning those, but they're learning things around designing, around critical thinking, creativity, and how to master the digital citizenship piece. So examples of some of the things that they're doing in this space, and again, I think Robert is someone who can attest to this, because I think he probably actually helped write some of the core curriculum. But one of the things that I saw when I was first visited was a class called The Way Things Work. So the way things works is that it's an interdisciplinary curriculum that really involves both math and sciences, and it's using game design to study genetics. And in the final test, the kids have to work together in a small group on a game on who will survive to reproduce, type of thing. And it is just, kids are so engaged. It's fun. It's about leveling up. It's about winning and failing. And succeeding like one right after the other. So in order to reach the next level, you've got to fail to succeed, type of thing. And so this is the kind of thing that doesn't happen in traditional schools, right? So you tend to fail at the test at the end, and you have no opportunity to actually figure out how to do better at that point. So the way that they design their curriculum is about the opportunity for this. They have student clubs, just like other schools do during lunch, that focus around their interests, of course. And they have after-school programs there that are embedded in the things that they're interested in. So they get to use new equipment, like developing, like I think 3D Fridays is something that they do, and they create 3D models, and they print them out and learn these new skills around them, type of thing. So the guiding principles at Quest are actually not so dissimilar from what you saw in your media. It's that everyone participate, all kids are experts, kids are mentors, adults are mentors too, so that the learning happens both ways between kids and adults. The challenge is also constant. That's the ability to continually level up and learn as they go along. And you learn by doing. Again, as someone like me, I learn so much better by doing. And so the other big piece of our grant making is, you're asking, so where does badges fit into all of this? Great. Is that we know these things can't happen in these demonstration sites without connectors, right? So the idea behind connected learning is also that it's important to build these bridges. And we're focusing our efforts also on building the kind of bridges for these connected learning experiences. Now, there are a number of ways that we can go about it, but I think we've honed in on several levels. One is, as you know, is badges. That's what you all are doing. And as I said, this notion began with thinking about badges is that, is there a way of measuring what kids are doing in their out-of-school hours that will count to make a difference towards their success? And so the conversations around badges begin with thinking about that and about digital literacy, actually. And what we found was that there's an incredible interest among the adults out there around badges. As you all have experienced and at the DML conference too as well, is that the partners and the collaborators that were part of this, the industry and the universities and the federal agencies, are just literally gaga over this, okay? And so they, and I think this is where you all have to, think carefully and think about this, is that Washington, D.C., in terms of a policy piece, has really latched onto this notion of badges and are looking towards it as a way to measure some of the skills that aren't being measured in not just schools, but also in adult lives where it's not being traditionally measured. So the badges for vets, for example, this is something that the Veterans Affairs Department is interested in, the Department of Energy, the Department, they're very interested in this because they have not been able to figure out how to capture the skills. And badges is a way for them to do this. It's actually even gotten into the language of RFPs that the Department of Ed has put out. And so you start to see how it's already making a difference. And so, like I said, no pressure, but people are really, really looking forward to what you all are going to produce in March in the following years. But we've been very, very careful and thoughtful about saying this is just the beginning. This is, we're learning as we go along, we're going to have to make adjustments. But it's certainly it's something that people, regardless of age or experience, seem to understand the value of. Another big part of our work is around assessments. And I think, again, this is something that Robert can speak to as well, because we're partnering up with the Gates Foundation on this, is, how do you rethink formative assessments that look different than what they look as now? And how are games, in particular, can they play a big part in the assessment? So the Gates Foundation is a big partner in this, in the Games Learning and Assessment Lab, that will look at video games and develop video games a way that not just engage kids in an innovative ways, but also provide student data that will lead to being able to assess both core skills and traditional skills as well. So this is a very exciting opportunity, and we're also looking forward to the great things that will come out of here too. And the third way that we've been focusing on is mentors and teachers. We know that from clearly the work at UMedia and at Quest, this is such a critical piece of any of this succeeding, is that we have to have well-trained and well-developed mentors who are engaged as facilitators in the process. And so developing teacher innovation and adult innovation in terms of how they interact with kids and are made to be facilitators and co-partners in the learning is really important. And finally, it brings us back to our 3 peers. How do we continually bring this back? And as you all are thinking about your badges, think about the role of the connected learning piece in terms of your culture, the interests, and the academics, and ultimately figuring out how do we help create more pathways for young adults, particularly into academic civic engagement and ultimately workforce. And some of the fun parts of what we do have to do with the pop culture that clearly drives a lot of the interest in our young people. And I wish Connie was here to talk about it, because she is the one who really has been driving this piece of work and understands the pop culture in a way. And as you know, we partnered with the Born This Way Foundation earlier this year, which is Lady Gaga's foundation, essentially. And the reason behind sort of really capturing is that, she embodies a lot of what young people are thinking about these days in terms of pop culture. And at the she hosted and facilitated a research symposium back in, I think, the spring, and the Born Brave Bus was something that UMedia folks have taken on and developed, and the idea is how do we capture and think about the many youth who are her followers and turn that into useful experiences as well. So that's a brief synopsis of where grant making is. For those who have worked with us, you all know that this continues to evolve on a sometimes daily basis, but the great part about it is that being at MacArthur, I think what makes MacArthur unique in its grant making is the research aspect of it, and really the opportunity and ability to truly think out of the box in terms of what innovation can truly be. We love to hear your feedback, your ideas, and your questions about this, because we learn from you all in terms of the work that you're doing, and it inspires us to think about better ways to do the work.
Thanks so much, Anne-May. We're going to have to transition and get Robert plugged in. So while he's doing that, maybe I can just say a few things. While Anne was talking, it struck me that we've been at this pretty much for 1 year now. And we started last September, so I'm going to declare today the first anniversary of the beginning of badging. And you're the outcome of it, right? So, but we're looking to you, no pressure again, but we're looking to you. Peer pressure is sort of what we're aiming for. But as many of you I think know, the Gates Foundation, as part of the grant is funding, as we speak, a research competition that we're in the midst of at the moment, that are looking at partnerships of research with your own grant activity and badge development. And it struck us in looking at the initial letters of intent that have come through, we thought we'd get something like 20, and we got over 60, right? So the interest, of course, is building not just incrementally. I mean, it's growing in leaps and bounds. But it also struck us, sort of looking back over the year of activity, working with the folks at Mozilla, in very intimate and extended ways, how much sophisticated development there's been around thinking about badging in a way in which Anne was suggesting, the way it's been taken up in DC, in the political community, in educational development, and so on. So there's an opportunity, I think, to have tremendous impact, right? And badging, right, is central to the development of this impact. And so the way in which badges are able to capture new modes of learning assessment cross-generationally, I think, is very important over here. And it's something I think we want to impress upon you to sort of constantly come back to in thinking about in the development of your own projects. Having said that, while we're waiting for the technology to catch up with us, let me just acknowledge a number of people in the house today, so from whom you'll be hearing through the morning. So Barnett Berry, who's the president of the Center for Teaching Quality, which exists down the road over here, and he'll be talking to us. He came on late, so we want to give him a special sense of gratitude and thanks. Todd Ederbols, who's the CEO of Inside Jobs, from whom we'll be hearing as well later this morning, and the relation between, of course, teaching, learning, and jobs is very important, and of course badging has a role in that regard. I just saw Aaron Knight walk into the room from Mozilla. I'm not sure if Chris McAvoy is here as well, but they'll, as we've been mentioning, the open badging infrastructure and Mozilla have been absolutely centrally important to this development and are a constitutive partner of ours as we move forward. We ready?
I think so.
Okay, so Robert Torres needs little introduction, as he's repeatedly been referenced in the half an hour or so that we've been going over here. Robert is a senior program officer in education at the Gates Foundation. He has generously supported our initiative, in badging, and particularly in relation to learning and teacher mastery. He was involved at the Institute of Play, as you heard, in the development of Quest to Learn with Katie Salin and others. And so it's a pleasure to welcome Robert. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions both of Anne and Robert in if Connie arrives in time, or Connie yelled as well. So, Robert Clark.
Good morning, everyone. I may mention that I was part of a couple of projects, especially Institute of Plays, and so for many years before going to the Gates Foundation, like for 6 years, I was actually a grantee of MacArthur's. And part of that, just quickly, is that part of my work in going to the Gates Foundation was really to take some of the work that we were doing at MacArthur and sort of creating the bridge. So a lot of the work that began at MacArthur was kind of outside of school work for really good reasons. MacArthur took that shift to work outside of schools. And part of my work at the Gates Foundation was trying to move that work back into schools and to see how it plays out. So I'll tell you about that in the context of your work, but before doing so, I do want to take a moment to thank folks. To thank Anne and Connie and David and Cathy and Mozilla for really taking the seed of an idea that I remember when it began like some 6 years ago, and we might argue about the genesis, but I remember this researcher from UCLA, Eva Baker, giving a keynote address at AERA, the biggest education conference in the world, talking about how we should think about assessment in the context of badges. And you all can look it up. That particular speech that happened at AERA some 6 or 7 years ago, I forget which, but from then began this conversation that MacArthur really took on. And so I thank them for being brave, and thank you all for being the pioneers in that work. So what I wanted to do, just give you a little sense. So we have at Gates some 30 plus different education strategies. So I cannot talk about our portfolio because it's so immense. But what I can do is give you a sense of the strategies that I lead. One of them, which I'm not going to talk about too much, is the Games for Learning and Assessment strategy. And that takes up sort of half my life. The other half is this strategy relative to this work, which is called Proficiency Pathways. And that strategy is really about amplifying the routes through which youth may complete credit-bearing work. Right now, we really have one route, right? Which is the traditional sort of high school, K-12 route through which kids can complete credit. And so how might we imagine, in fact, breaking that monopoly, right? And creating lots of different routes through which kids might get credit for the work that they complete. That in the last couple of years, in the last 2 years, has broken down into, I would say 3, and then the 4th thing on there is I Nicole. But 3 major different projects, right? Our biggest one, and it's awesome to see project managers in the audience. So our biggest one is called Project Mastery, right? And so it's funding 3 big sites, or 3 sites, and that's Adams 50, which folks you're going to hear from today, actually, which is a school district outside of Denver, the school district of Philadelphia, and Asia Society, which is a network of some 80 schools, to do proficiency pathways. And we break down proficiency pathways in 3 ways, and I'll talk about what those ways are. We also have funded the Digital Youth Network to do work around proficiency pathways, you guys, and iNicole. iNicole, for those of you who don't know iNicole, is an advocacy and policy organization that works with policy and decision makers across the country, both at the federal and state levels, to push on certain policies. So for you guys, some of you may or may not know this, so one of the things that, to make badges and proficiency pathways possible, if we're thinking about learning anytime, anywhere, is that there's a particular policy that that binds and defines the way school happens in the U.S., which is that you have to be in a seat, right? You have to go to school and sit in a chair, and so 36 states now in the last 2 years, which has really made us really pivot our strategy, and I'll talk about that. 36 states have now issued seat time waivers, so that we can really think about school not happening in school, just in school, but in fact do these alternative pathways. So 36 states. There was a report by the National Governors Association that came out just in July. You can look up just around how that happened and where that stands. But I wanted to tell you what the three major tenets that define this strategy that you all sort of fall under, this proficiency pathway strategy. For us, those are the tenet of mastery, anytime, anywhere, and for credit. And we define those in these ways. So what does it actually mean to be masterful in something like filmmaking or biology? And so we know a lot about mastery and expertise in at the post-secondary level. We know less about what expertise looks like in the K-12 space, right? So what does it actually mean to be masterful? We look to the Common Core state standards for guidance, but we also even more look for what expertise and mastery looks like within domains. So a domain of knowledge, such as filmmaking, such as chemistry. That domain of knowledge, what does it actually mean to be masterful, and what are the competencies of those domains? And so working with districts to really think deeply about what that is. You'll see the last point on there is application. One thing that's really important to the way that we think about mastery is can you actually use knowledge to solve complex problems? Can you actually use algebraic knowledge and skill to solve an engineering problem? Can you apply your knowledge to solve a domain-based problem? So again, these sound obvious in some ways, right? And yet in the K-12 space, these are like tectonic shifts, right? To really think about how do we think about application and how do we think about anchoring ourselves in domains. These things too, having clear learning pathways and clear opportunities. So we enter this space as learners. So you guys are pioneering, we are learning. And a lot of these things are big questions, right? That, how do we actually do this stuff? What does it mean to create a learning pathway? What are the elements and components of a good pathway? And so a big part of this, which David and Cathy just issued, is a research effort to really dig into and start to understand the principles of the work and the elements. And I'll talk about that at the end of my brief chat in terms of our path forward. But so those are some of the things that define mastery for us. Anytime, anywhere. So these districts, like Adams 50, the other for anytime, anywhere is, can districts create the infrastructure to allow for learning to happen, not just in school, but outside of school. So from my own research with Institute of Play, we saw that to learn something deeply, you actually need an ecology. That when we look at middle class kids and how they're learning algebra, let's say, in a deep way, algebra is showing up in school, but it's also showing up with conversations with the soccer coach, with the tutor, with online experiences, so that there's a whole sort of redundant ecology, right? That where all of these nodes, where the content is showing up in different ways for the kids who we work with, low income, largely Black and Latino kids, there is one node, and that is that classroom. And so how do we create an ecology of redundancy that kids can travel? So that is really, when we think about technology infrastructure, is to create that ecology. And a learning pathway that connects in and out of school. And then for credit, if we do all this work and really don't change policy, it is a bit for naught, right? So how do we really lift the district and state level, the barriers that keep us from actually making this work count? And then a question that is part of this work is, how do we break a monopoly of who's the arbiter of credit, right? So a lot of you in this room may be able to issue, to validate and show that, gosh, these learners actually have created enough evidence to say that we may be able to be the arbiter of who knows and has been able to do something. So this is, big questions for us. We are very much, like I said, learners in this space, but really pushing hard on these kinds of things. Looking ahead, so like I said, in the last 2 years, all of these, a bunch of amazing things have happened. One thing that happened that we actually weren't expecting that would happen so quickly is that you all would launch. That the badges work happened as quickly as it did. And so, like Ame said, DC is really interested in this conversation. And so what has happened, believe it or not, is that states, not only are there 36 states, but now states who have issued CTEM waivers. So in the last 6 months, for example, there are these assessment consortia that the Obama administration funded to create innovations in assessment. And that's a whole other conversation as to whether actually they'll be innovative, but so there are these assessment consortia, and so one of them, and I should say that the work that those guys are doing will move us steps closer to where we want to be. But part of the work that we're doing in the games and assessment work is just because of that we think we can go farther. However, those two consortia have begun to talk about proficiency pathways and competency-based education. So those two terms are synonymous, competency-based proficiency pathways. And so I've been on the phone personally with some, and some of you I think were on an initial call, with some 20 states with Smarter Balance. Smarter Balance is one of the consortia. The other consortia is PARC, P-A-A-R-C. So I've been on the phone with some 20 states with Smarter Balance talking about proficiency pathways and competency-based education, and what do we do? How do we do this? How do states actually begin to think about this anytime, anywhere, in and out of school, competency-based education? And so what we've learned is that there is a real hunger for information and for guidance. So that has made us pivot our strategy, and so that in 2013, moving forward, what we want to do starting this fall, so we will be in touch, is really do a scan of the country, of places that have been doing this work. So we want to talk to you all, and I've talked to David about this, talk to the badges folks, talk to our Project Mastery folks. There are some states that have been pioneering the proficiency pathways work, such as Maine and Oregon and New Hampshire. Talk to them and really begin to surface what are some common elements that we are seeing across the space, and then issue what I'm calling, for the moment, some kind of introductory framework to the field. And so that work, and also hopefully that work will begin this fall, and then sometime in early 2013, begin to do some validation work, to do some validation studies, especially of the states that have been at it for longer, such as Oregon and New Hampshire, to see, did the kids who are doing proficiency-based pathways work do better, or at least as well as kids who are not on those pathways. So, and we need to have, to do that kind of work really if we're gonna have the kind of impact that we wanna have with this work. So, I wanna thank you all for being so courageous. Cheers and good luck.
Thanks, Robert. We just want to give a few minutes to somebody who's not represented on the program. A good party always has to have a surprise guest, right? So Dan Hickey has been, from Indiana University, has been engaged in a project funded by the MacArthur Foundation to document the badging work, and we want to give him 5 minutes to, because in a sense it's documenting us collectively, we want to give him 5 minutes just to introduce himself and introduce the project very briefly to you, so that you're familiar with it, because he'll be engaged with you going forward in conversations and interviews around this work. So, Dan Hickey.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, Dan.
So, hi, everyone. No slides, just 5 minutes. Thank you, David. We've spoken with some of you. So the project that we're working on, we decided to call it the DML Badge Design Principles Documentation Project. We've been in touch with many of you. We've spoken with a few of you. At the core of this project is really trying to capture the knowledge. All of you are doing this amazing trial and error. And there's a lot of knowledge being generated, and a lot of that knowledge will kind of evaporate if we don't really systematically try to track that and sort of share it amongst people. So we're trying to sifting through what people are doing. So that's the essence of this project, to try to find what are the practices that are emerging across these projects, what's working, what's not working, and then gradually over the 2 years that we'll be working, try to transform that knowledge into more general design principles, first sharing it amongst yourselves, and eventually creating a format in which we can share it with others. That's the project. The people on the project, myself, Andy Strapaglione, stand up please, Andy. And she's a doctoral student. I am an associate professor of learning sciences at Indiana University. Andy's one of my doctoral students, and there are 2 other doctoral students on this project, Theo and Elise Buffenbarger. So those are the 4 people on the project, and each of us is taking a different strand. We've decided to look at the practices and eventually the principles really in 4 areas. We're starting with recognition and credentialing. Since all badges in the core are really about recognizing learning. The second strand that we're looking at is assessment. Once you've decided this is the learning you're going to recognize, then you really have to ask yourself, well, okay, then how are we going to assess it? Just those 2 decisions, many of the values as an organization that you embody, that you care about, will be embedded in the decisions that you make and the work that you do around that. The third strand will be motivation. There's a lot of issues, there's a lot of questions about how do you use badges to motivate people and what sort of strategies are working. And in particular, the thing that we're quite fascinated by is how do these things interact with each other? If you've decided to recognize a certain kind of learning in a certain way, that has implications for how that motivates. And so that's the kind of thing we're going to be looking at very carefully over time. And then finally, research. As many of you are starting to learn, badges are just a treasure trove of information. Every one of those 8 metadata points associated with a badge, for many of your organizations, simply knowing what badges have been issued to who, right? Those 8 metadata points is far more than many informal learning environments are able to do to evaluate your programs. But then there's so much more. You can analyze that data. You can also then follow the links and learn a lot more. So those are the 4 categories of practices. we've done 8 interviews so far, so we'll be reaching out to all of you. Hopefully we'll be able to speak with you initially about what are your intended practices. What did you intend to do? When you wrote your proposal, what were you thinking? What ideas did you have? And then what's really interesting to us is watching projects translate their intended principles or intended practices into enacted practices. What are you finding when you try to put your plans in place that's letting you do what you plan to do, or making you do something different or something completely different? So that's this contextual knowledge we're trying to capture. Going forward then, as those practices get formalized and we start looking at formal practices across projects, we begin to see principles. And then we can share those back to you. And what we're negotiating the details exactly of how we're going to do this, how we'll share this information. But that in a nutshell is the project. So we're looking forward, really, it's been so wonderful. We've talked with 8 of you. It's amazing what we're learning and what we're hearing, what we're discovering. So we're looking forward to speaking to all of you. If you have any questions, we'll be here for the duration and we'd love to talk to you. So thank you very much.
We're going to have a Q&A session now with Chung and Robert Torres. We hoped we'd be joined by Connie Yowell, Director of Education at the MacArthur Foundation, but we've just heard her plane's been delayed. So and Robert, you're the show. If you come up and answer questions, I think we have about 10 or 15 minutes now for questions. Ruby has a mic. Tori's a mic.
So I also want to introduce another MacArthur colleague, which many of you may know is Jen Humke as well. So Jen joined us in January, and it's just been fantastic having her on, so to say the very least. But Jen can answer questions too, so.
So this is your opportunity, right? You've heard some big ideas about connected learning. You've heard some big ideas about the proficiency pathways that Gates is doing. So this is a really good opportunity. So as you're understanding about these big concepts that these foundations are pursuing and how you're a part of it, your chance to jump in.
While Victoria's getting over there, I want to remind you it's a big room and we really need the mic so that people can hear each other. So when you speak into the mic, point it at your mouth, just a couple of inches away from your face.
Like you just did? That was a great demonstration. What are you doing? I like that.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the learning pathways. I was wondering, are you doing is teacher professional development part of that? And I know there's a teacher badging strands. I'm just kind of interested to know more about that. So.
Yes. An important part of, and there are project mastery people here among you all, folks who, are those, did Asia Society come?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back there.
They're from each of our project mastery, there are folks here, and they can talk about the professional development program each. But the answer is yes. So this, like I said, it requires really just a big paradigm shift to think about what is the role of teachers and instructors in general in these models. Working with teachers and doing professional development is certainly a key part of the work. Some folks, like I know Asia Society was interested in creating themselves a badging system that mirrored the kinds of competencies that kids are supposed to be learning, that they create pathways for teachers to develop those pathways, those competencies, and be given some kind of recognition for those competencies through badges. And again, better to ask folks who are in the project mastery group.
I was really excited by both of your presentations. Robert, you asked a really great question, which is who is the arbiter of credit? Because I think that's key in the badging and dealing with federal and state legislation that mandates seat time, hours, and teacher professional development and students. And so I'm wondering what your work is with the U.S. Department of Ed in terms of trying to change federal policy, state policy, because we can create the mechanisms, but until the policies are changed, we're still accountable to legislation like that.
So we can't do anything about the legislation, right? Because it's against the law for us to do it, but we can, I think part of what we've been doing is actually building out a policy agenda for the DML portfolio. And we've been working with a number of people who are providing advice around that. But I think we've done a whole year of actually gathering information from the National Conference of State Legislators and actually just figuring out what's happening at the state level. And I think what we've discovered just in the last year is that a lot of the state legislators, which I think is where we're going to be able to make the difference, is at the state level and not the federal level, especially with waivers and with the Common Core piece, is that that's where we're really trying to focus our efforts. I think legislators get that technology can help enhance classrooms, but I think they're thinking about it pretty traditionally right now. But they're also very open to understanding how it can impact learning in a bigger way. I mean, their roles are limited too, as well. And what they are looking for is really practices and examples of how to do this better. And we've seen a shift just over in the last maybe 5 or 6 months of the shift from just thinking about hardware and software to how can this really impact learning. So I think it's going to be really critical for the work that you are doing to think about the impact of it. Because that's where people are. They just need stories, they need ideas, they want to know how it can happen.
So I agree with all that. I think so. There is an openness from state and federal folks to the conversation. The only thing that we can really do now is establish an evidence base, right? So we have ideas, and I think they're receptive to the ideas, but all we can do at this point, because the work is so nascent, is to establish an evidence base. That is to say that folks like you guys and organizations that are working outside of the school know how to effectively identify competencies, effectively create pathways for people to develop those competencies, and that you can effectively assess and create and gather evidence against those competencies in rich and robust ways that we can then say there are other people who can do this outside of schools. So I think where we really are is there, just really trying to get some proof points that we can share.
And I think this has to be balanced, which there's always the tension of being able to continue to innovate. Because you can't really innovate if you're bounded by evidence base too as well. And so it's thinking about how do you get that evidence base, but also how you can continue to innovate out of the box as well. And so many of you, I'm sure, are aware of the I3 funds, and I think the idea behind it was to really further innovation, but within the scheme of what can happen in a federal department, it's actually much harder to do because of all of the requirements about evidence-based. So from the MacArthur end, we will always try and continue to push innovation out of the box thinking and in ways that people haven't thought before.
Yeah. And it's a tension between, I think, our foundations around that end.
Really? Which is why we're good compliments.
That's right, exactly.
Can you hear me? 1, 2. My name is Emmanuel. I'm with Sweetwater Aquaponds, where we have a badge around aquaponics, which is like learning by doing through feeding fish and plants in a recirculating system. So we actually have a proficiency built into it, because you have to build it and do it. And then one of our challenges is with education and educational standards. If we're in the middle of this paradigm shift that we keep talking about, we recognize paradigms embody a value shift. And what we're looking is, it was mentioned earlier, this value that was so obsessed with either certain forms of efficiencies and certain forms of test scores, whereas we're getting all of these youth of all ages in all walks, that the behavioral shifts, the anecdotal evidence, the stories, the videos, the testimonials are like, we've got more social capital than we could possibly cash a check on. How do we balance and leverage this shift in this paradigm to more of a value which embraces these individuals? And we don't have the longitudinal stuff yet, right? We don't have these long-term test scores. Obviously, this is what, a year into the making. So how do we balance this conversation at the state and the federal level, saying we have all this great stuff, can you work with us shifting this paradigm? Sorry.
How do we balance that? I think, you know, Cathy made a really good point about really thinking about innovating at the research and evidence levels. At least that's how I interpreted your comment. And so we are open to innovations at those levels of what does it mean to develop a preponderance of evidence relative to a phenomenon, right? Okay. Sorry. So we're open to that. Just because we may be open to that doesn't mean that the states and federal levels are open to that. So making good arguments relative to those new kinds of bodies of evidence is important when you're considering new ways of showing evidence. I would say that that's an uphill battle as well. You know, that we do have to show the depth and rigor of our research and our analyses, and so it's a tough battle, but we at this point, in terms of where we are with those kind of arguments, we need some pretty traditional measures still, that kids are making gains against the kind of competencies we care about. So, mixed response.
I worked in the out-of-school time field for about 10 years before coming to MacArthur, and I think one of the things that we always struggled with as the field of after-school was growing, there were so many opportunities and so many ways to innovate in ways that couldn't happen in school. I think what we didn't do well in the after-school field and need to continue to do is we didn't figure out how to partner well with unlike-minded people, right? And so I think that tension is really very healthy in terms of figuring out how to create the balance. You can't create the balance if you don't bring the people in that you have to create the balance with. And so as you all are building your badges, you've got to bring in school and out of school and industry into that, because you have to build buy-in at the same time as you're building. And so that tension, I think, is healthy. And you're right, it is not easy. But I'm starting to see a shift in some of the after-school folks who are actually starting to embrace the idea that maybe we should be looking at outcomes. Maybe we shouldn't just be a fun place. If you want to change your image about being a fun place to do things and be, considered like we are actually making a difference, you've got to employ some of the practices that will show that people will understand. So starting and bringing in partners that you're not usually comfortable with, I think it's a good way to start, and you start to build common knowledge as a result. But it's not easy, and it's not going to happen overnight.
I actually just wanted to say something. I'm May Mon from Cooper Hewitt. We were Design Exchange. But as part of another project, our organization is part of a consortium for an I3 grant. And so I think it's really important what we're saying here is we're all out of school learning places that are working together with the New York Department of Education to look at arts assessment. And the interesting thing, what you're saying is that they call the feds. When we go there, the feds are very interested in badging. So I come back to a meeting and like, what do you have for me on gaming? Because they're very interested. So I think that's very important, but it's good to know that the conversations being led down at the U.S. Department of Education are very interested in the idea of badging and how we take that and bring it into what they're doing at the national level. So the idea of gathering all the evidence for what we're doing, I think is really important for me and how we can move what we're moving forward too. So I'm looking forward to all the Dan's work.
Is it in response to it?
I'm Barnett Berry, and I promise you, Jesse, when we have our conversation later this afternoon and in the breakout session, we'll really dive deep into that question of how to find that balance and draw upon your extraordinary efforts here to move the system forward. We have some ideas, and I'd love to get into them with you. Thanks. More to come.
We're already previewing content that we're going to be.
I mean, it is possible. So, I mean, give me an example of something that we didn't think would ever happen is that the New Hampshire Department of Education, all right, took the 21st century funding that is primarily for after school, and they were able to design a program and count the credits that the high school kids were getting in the after school programs there. And they worked deliberately with the Department of Ed and with the After School Network to make that happen. And it happened, once the conversation started, it happened within a year. And so if you get the right people at the right place at the right time, it can happen.
Hi, I'm Carla Caselli. I'm with Mozilla Foundation. I'm really glad this conversation is happening because I think that something that is a constant balance that we're always fighting with is the recognition that all this learning is happening and there's all this informal recognition that we'd like to see happening, but at the same time, when we move to standards and when the federal government starts to step in, things start to become standardized. And the standardization is where the issues start to arise because I think one of the beauties of open badges is the fact that there are lots of different levels, lots of different badges, lots of different things that are recognized on different levels. And again, I'm wondering if either of you can kind of talk to this as things start to move into the federal level, and I know there's a thrill about badges right now. What does that mean for the individuals who are really thinking about badges as kind of this exploratory dynamic thing?
So I actually think this is where, I mean, I think that there are opportunities with Common Core in a way that didn't exist with the current set of standards. I mean, Common Core was theoretically designed to actually go deeper into standards in terms of going deeper into what it really means to get X, Y, and Z standards. And the way that they are talking about, if you take a look at one of the Common Core pieces, you will see that there's that attempt to go deeper. And the two consortiums are working on this. But at the same time, each of the states have to determine how to do this. And so what the consortiums are doing are presenting recommendations, but it's an opportunity for you to work with your state departments of ed actually, and the folks are doing, to come up with real practices, because that's what they're looking for, to delve deeper into this way, in a way that the standards do actually, envelop the 21st century skills that we're talking about here. So, but Robert will know much more about this because I know he's deeply ingrained with this, but I do think it's an opportunity.
Sure. Well, the Common Core, you're saying, has really tried to look at domain-based practices, for example, and think about what does it mean to apply skill and knowledge, and they're framed in that way. In terms of, if I understood your question correctly, the work that we're doing, for example, at Quest to Learn, takes a lot at informal practices, and also thinks a lot about domain-based practices and what does it mean to go deep, using what customarily may be seen as informal practices. And what we're seeing in the design of those environments where kids are able to go deep, where kids are able to tinker and explore it, is that they're actually, at least for now, the early evidence is showing that those kids are actually doing better than their counterparts on standardized measures. So it's interesting to see how that if we actually go down the path that we want to be going down, kids, at least at the Quest to Learn, seem to be showing that they are actually mastering work in deeper ways, and it's being reflected on standardized measures.
Donald Brinkman, Microsoft Research. Hey guys. I'm just wondering, this is really for you, Robert. When you talk about mastery and you talk about Common Core standards, and this kind of leads in, I think you've been talking around this a little bit. I just wanted to understand clearly. It seems like a lot of the portfolio of the Gates Foundation is investing in this space. It's in formal learning, in classroom, looking in schools. And I'm just, when looking at badges, are you thinking about badges in the context of formal learning, or is this, a sign that Gates is starting to think more about education outside the classroom, or is this, where do you see your part in this whole effort?
So I actually think that formal learning and informal learning is a false dichotomy, right? That as I said before, if we look at when we look at how middle class kids are developing a sense of mastery, those what is showing up for them in school shows up for them outside of school in very seamless ways, and so. My concern is how do we create ecologies that really blur these lines, ecologies of learning that blur these lines, especially for the kids who have been traditionally underserved. So the informal versus formal, the Gates Foundation is definitely not having a conversation about being in the informal space. I have that conversation it's sort of my hidden agenda. I don't really think that we should be having one or the other. That it's one conversation about learning, and kids don't do that division. Divide those lines, and so why should we?
That's why you have anytime, anywhere, or anytime, any place, right?
That's right. Anytime, anywhere is our euphemism.
Hi, I'm Charles Perry with Mentor Mob from Team My Girl Scout Stash is an app. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on, there seems to be sort of a three-prong attack that's developing with this conversation, where there's the innovation that happens with the badges, and that has to do with motivation, and has to do with assessment, like we were talking about, and then there's making sure that the things that we do are all written down, and making sure that we have an evidence base. And then the third thing seems to be presenting all that entire package in a compelling story, right? And that's closing the deal. But the third part is closing the deal.
Yeah. And also gets at the balance, I think, how well we tell these stories.
Yeah. I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that. I remember a video that I saw very early on that included many of you and Gabe Newell, who's just kind of a personal hero of mine, who's the developer of Valve Software, who founded a company that creates incredibly innovative, fun games, and also runs a company where people love working there. And that video is what sort of lit the fire in me to be a part of this. I just wanted to know what you thought about that.
I think you're on target in terms of that, and again, I think that we are the funders. We are in the unique position of being able to provide you all with the funding to do the hard work, quite frankly. And I think part of our role will be to help find places that we still need to continue funding to allow you to lift the work as well. And I think it is telling the stories, but it's actually being able to see how you can influence all these other bigger questions that are happening here. But at the same time, maintaining the integrity of what it is that you're doing. And I think that's part of the balance, is how do you maintain the integrity? Because if you don't focus on that, it will end up being just another silver bullet that didn't work. And so I think it's really important that you all work with Mozilla and HASTAC and other experts that we can bring in to help think about this and think about it as a through path. I think one of the things that Todd will talk about later is the connection to workforce and really thinking about the through path of what it is that you're developing that is going to evolve into people getting jobs and being successful in life, and thinking about it in that way. And think about it in terms of your own career, right? In terms of what that means. So, I think we're all learning together moving forward, and I think HASTAC and Mozilla are just going to be so instrumental, key in helping to make sure that we all move forward together and figuring out things that need to be done. But I think, Cathy, you want to offer something?
Yeah, I love that this conversation is going between informal learning, between learning and assessment stories. Because I think whenever you see, I just read an article about Avenues, this new school in New York that Surrey Cruz is going to go to, talk about a story, $40,000 a year tuition, private school, state of the art. No distinction between formal learning and informal learning. The Finnish story, right? You know, everyone knows about Finland. They haven't had standardized testing for decades. OECD gives them standardized tests and the kids come out 1, 2, 3, 4 in the world on standardized tests. The point is, if this informal learning is good, and rich people know that, and Finland knows that, the assessments will get better.
Right.
So I think making that a continuity, making the enrichment you have in the most innovative, experimental, motivating, exciting ways in school and out of school, being not an alternative to testing, but in fact the thing that makes you learn better, and the things that learn better also improve your test scores. Until we change the fact that you need high SAT scores to get into college, you're not going to get middle-class parents to get rid of assessment. I think that's the responsibility. That's why it's so great that we're doing this at UCHRI and at Duke, and that we're, on the university level, we're having this conversation. And most people don't know that multiple choice test is invented as a doctoral dissertation in 1914, and the first agency to adopt it is this Scholastic Aptitude Test, the college entrance test. So until we change the college end, you're not going to change the other end. But I think that motivated, out-of-class learning, the story, one story to tell is it does increase scores, assessment, other things, and we have to have better ways of telling the story. And partly the badging system is a new way of telling the story of what counts and what we value. So, I don't think they're just dichotomies. I think we're all telling the same story.
Yeah.
And it's great that we're getting closer and closer to really having that story refined in a way that policymakers will understand.
And there have been a lot of papers and things done on just looking at private schools, Exeter and things like that. And if you look at just their schedules, there's some papers out on this. You look at their schedules, it is throughout the day, and they figure out what makes the most sense in terms of people's, students' lives. And they're scheduled through the evening and back type of thing. So it's not anything new, but I think what is new is that just gives the opportunity for all kids to be able to participate in something, and I think that's what we need to work towards.
We'll take a couple more questions, so go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tobias DeVore with Digital On-Ramps, and we're in Philadelphia. We're based a lot of workforce development stuff, like we just started talking about, and as we're developing a supply of badges and a supply of badge earners, we're also really thinking about a supply of badge acceptors, so employers, higher ed, and is there an equal scale level of work on your side of thinking about how to get employers engaged to accept the badges that people are earning? So it's really kind of the currency of badges has to be, the ecosystem needs to have it, badge acceptors of employers.
So I think Todd's going to address that a little later. I'm happy to have you address that. And I think Aaron has been thinking about this really hard. And that's actually part of the work that Mozilla will be focused on in this next year. Is as you all are doing that, that is a huge focus of what Mozilla will be working on. So either one of you guys want to?
We'll talk. You get I think we're going to have more conversation. We got a queue. There's somebody right here. Oh, that's you. I'm sorry. There was one person. Okay.
I've already spoken. It's a.
Go ahead. Oh. Okay.
Hello, I'm Michelle Albrecht from the Earthworks Badges Project, and Cathy, you were all just talking about this, but one of the things that Robert said was the assessment, that people are doing well on these standardized tests. But I keep coming back to thinking, why is that the end measure of whether or not we're successful? Because it's such an inadequate way to evaluate student work. So if in the end of the day, the way we say, yes, we were successful because like the Finland kids, they score really high, what is that really telling us? And so if we're gonna be innovative and come up with new ways of doing assessment, then I think we have to have other measures that are acceptable, and I don't know how we get that acceptance, so.
So, this is just an anecdote, but I have a friend who works for ThoughtWorks.com, which is this international software development company, and he and I were talking about badges sort of informally, and I think one of the interesting that's happening is that at a place like that, which is an international organization, they're actually completely rethinking like how they determine how they're going to hire people. So they actually aren't hiring people for their skills. What they actually are hiring people now are whether they're agile, whether they have the ability to think in broad ways, and then they're bringing them in and they're training them and providing professional development in a whole different way than they've done before. And so it's really interesting because I think the industry may be changing too as well, and that might be one of the driving things. And they are actually thinking, and I think other industries may be doing too, they're thinking about building their own badging system themselves for their company in terms of being able to identify the types of people that they bring in, how they help them build skills, and that professional development is going to be a huge part of their recruitment efforts now.
So I'll add to that by saying, I think we certainly, at least in the strategies that I lead, we certainly think that standardized tests are the wrong measures, right? So we and yet in the short term, we look to those and say, hey, this kind of instruction, this kind of game-based instruction is leading to these results. However, the engine of the system is assessment, right? The engine of the entire education system is the way that we assess. And so we have to innovate at the level of assessment. And in part for me, I think the badges work is that, right? Really thinking about how people come to show evidence that they can do and know something. Our games for learning and assessment strategy is doing just that, really pushing on assessment and trying to do a lot of work in that space. So what we're doing for the games in that space is saying, can we develop tests that do two things? Can we develop tests that are highly contextualized, where you place someone in a problem space and have them solve a problem in that space, right? So for example, we're using an EA AAA title called SimCity. So we're actually using SimCity, we're working with SimCity to mod SimCity and create assessment mechanics within the game that tests for Common Core standards. So one of the things that we're doing with that assessment is creating highly contextualized spaces. The other thing that we're doing is assessing complex skills that are so critical to really actually solving and learning something. So complex skills like collaboration, problem solving, systems thinking. So that work is really about taking on the standardized test problem and creating different kinds of assessments that measure the kinds of things we actually want to know. So, yeah.
I was thinking that one of the, and Dan may be looking toward this is that oftentimes I see traditional educators talk about, you guys have seen the chart about like in X amount of years, we will only have, X amount of kids graduating from college with 4-year degrees, et cetera, and that gap is starting to widen. And it appears as if the answer should be that we should get more kids into college getting 4-year degrees, and that will, help us with our workforce problems, et cetera. But what if badges became a big part of that too as well? So it's not just about 4-year degrees, but it's about the kinds and types of badges, because even if you have a 4-year degree, it really doesn't give you a sense of what skills that you have developed, and at the end of the day, that's the kind of people that industries want to hire. And so it's working towards it, and I think it's for us to help change the conversation among some of these folks about, thinking about it in a more dynamic way. And so if badges ends up in these presentations, 3 or 4 years from now, in terms of it becomes one of the core ways to identify when young people are ready for the world, per se, I think we'll have been successful.
We're going to take 2 last quick questions, and then we're going to go to a break, because I know what we're starting to do is unpack the conference already in this just one session, which we don't want to do. I think this is great thinking. We're going to take 2 more questions, and then we're going to go to a break.
I don't have a mic, can you hear me?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, and we'll give him the mic.
Okay. David Wiley, Brigham Young University, working on the National Manufacturing Badges System. I hate to be the curmudgeon in the back row, the guys on the Muppets up in the balcony, but I'm really troubled by a phrase I've heard, I think, 40 times now, which is that badges are about assessment. Badges are not about assessment. Assessment is what happens before a badge is issued. If you pass an assessment, then you receive a badge. And I think for people who are paying attention, hearing that badges are about assessment, they think, oh, badges is some new kind of item. It's a context-dependent item. It's an essay prompt. It's a multiple-choice item. It's something I can do item response theory on. It's a new branch of psychometrics. It's none of those things. When you look at the open badge infrastructure, it has nothing to do with assessment. It has to do with displaying credentials. Now, do we hope that new, better alternative forms of assessment will grow up next to badges? Yeah, nobody hopes for that more than me. But if we walk around saying that badges are about assessment, and the Department of Ed hears that, or NSF hears that, and then they look into it at all and they realize, hey, badges aren't about assessment, badges are about credentials, and they're about showing that you passed some assessment that happened before the badge got involved. We're setting ourselves up for a lot of trouble, I think. And so just a plea to bring a little precision to the discourse that badges are not about assessment. Badges happen after assessment. And do we want better assessments? Yes. Do we want more innovative assessments? Yes. And at the end of those, if students pass them, do we want to give them a badge? Yes. But just some grumpy words from the back of the room.
That wasn't very curmudgeon-y at all. I think what you have pointed out is ways that we have to communicate that better. So when I showed our slide about the 3 areas that we're working in, we separate them. It's credential, it's assessment, and it's teacher development. So I think amongst us, we just have to be diligent in terms of really explaining that, because people can easily mistake it for that. So thanks for being such a curmudgeon from the back row.
We got one more, and then we're going to go.
It's
Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to add one piece. The point's well taken, but I think one way to think about badging is that they're representations of assessment, right? I mean, obviously there are time-bound considerations of when the assessment takes place, as you indicate. But that's not to say that badges themselves are not about assessment. If we represent it carefully, right, to show that badges indicate that an assessment has taken place in the way any credentialing would do, right? Worthy of indicating that there is an assessment underlying it. And so it's perhaps we've been sloppy in the way we've spoken about, and you're right to call our attention to that. But I don't think they're disconnected in a quite deep sense.
They're related, but badges aren't assessments. And the rest of the field will follow our example in the way they talk about it.
So Erin's going to talk about that more later because you're stealing her presentation right now. So we'll let her set us all straight.
It's really extremely quick. It just goes back. I think it piggybacks from all the conversation. It goes back to the original question in a much more specific way. We are creating an ecology of redundancy. We call it an echo. And resonance across in school, out of school, so after school, at home, and in the workplace. I would like to hear, because we have a healthy tension in the front of the room, I'd like to hear how you weight those. If we were to report to you, following up saying, hey, because obviously our badges are great narratives and stories, like they're amazing. But how do we anchor that to, which one do you want to hear from the most?
So If I can just sort of go back to the part of the presentation that I was saying, though, a lot of this is it's about creating multiple pathways and multiple entryways. So there's no one way. So the way that I hear your question is more linear than I think you probably mean it. And I think one of the ways that one entryway for us has been through the out-of-school time, after-school space, and pushing innovation in that way, and then moving towards how do we create the kinds of practices that schools will understand and help with that. I think Gates is doing it from another perspective, and all are equally needed because it's going to take multiple entryways for this to happen.
So your question is about the balance of which one has more weight, the in-school or out-of-school, is that?
Well, I mean, certain agencies want to see the test scores, so we anchor it with supplemental anecdotal stuff. We say we don't have that yet, but we have other people, we have all these agencies studying it, and then other people are looking for like after-school programs. It's a shorter-term reporting. And then we have stuff at home where it's just all people's radars all together. We can show and demonstrate people are learning, but there's no structure for reporting it. So.
So you're getting at the assessment issue and the kind of evidence that that we might gather to show that somebody knows something better, whether it be in school or out of school. You know, for me, I have to just, and on a personal note, this work is so personal for me because I am the oldest of 5 kids to finish high school, and the children of my siblings are about to drop out of school too. And so and I come, you know, if you want to know more about my story, I made a movie about my family for HBO called New York Dream, about the impact of poverty on the Puerto Rican family. And you know, these things are so interesting. Like I see the kids, my nieces and nephews, and first of all, they have no idea what a pathway might be to, say, engineering. And so what I am interested in is how do we articulate these pathways? How do we create pathways for kids? And so 50% of most kids in every major city drop out of school, and those who don't drop out are flirting with dropping out for the whole time. So many make it through by the skin of their teeth. And so I'm interested in thinking about if you need to get that algebra credit to get some kind of legitimacy given to you, because it's all about legitimacy. Ultimately, badges are a form, if they're not a form of assessment, they're a form of legitimacy. We're legitimizing our kids in different ways, right? And so for that kid who's barely going to that algebra class, I would like to see a way that for the time that they're not in school, which may be half the time of the year, because they're doing other things or there's other, like how might we create ways that what they do outside of school, through an online course or through whatever other pathways there are to get that recognition that they completed the algebra course are possible, that we create those kinds of very wide and alternative and varied pathways. So that's really what this work is about. Ideally, it would be in the context of professions and domains, such as that the pathway may be around, say, engineering. NASA has a project that is doing just that among, is NASA here? Yeah, hi there. You know, what?
All of NASA's.
Well, these guys are doing a really interesting project in that sense, where they're taking on the right knowledge and skill, and kids are within game solving engineering problems. And so, might we have NASA, for example, be the arbiter of credit, while using gaming so really interesting thing, right? And so I know that a lot of the kids I know would be much more compelled to do that than to sit in the 19th century school that they're sitting in, being completely. So, you know, so I think, you know, it gets for me at that level in terms of, and so these guys have to have good assessments. They have to have good ways of showing that, yeah, kids actually mastered something.
So I'd like to thank Ame and Robert for really laying out sort of a beautiful picture for us of sort of how these two foundations are coming in multiple pathways to this problem. And thank you for sparking such a good conversation. I think we're going to take about a 7-minute break, okay? We're very close to all the amenities here, to the restrooms and everything else. And then we're going to hear from some of your peers to sort of spark more ideas in conversation. But thank you again for being with us.